Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 3, Episode 5. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Well, Steve, it's great to be back on the mic. I was on a little bit of vacation time, so it's great to be back together. Now, we should say right off the top, we've been doing episodes every 2 weeks in the summer, but starting next week after Labor Day, we go back to once a week. Lots of guests, lots of content for the rest of the year. So I'm actually really excited about that. It's really great.
Yeah, but that just means we can't take vacation. So
it's true. Well, let's jump right in. Top of my mind is what is going on with Amazon. They're talking department store, or people familiar with Amazon are talking department store, which is, whatever that is. Thoughts?
A few things. First of all, Amazon, as I think everybody knows by now, just experiments with a lot of things. I also think they like to jerk the market around because every time there's a rumor of an acquisition or a new format, they opened this hair salon in London and it's, oh my God, they're going into the beauty business. So I think it's hard to extrapolate from any particular thing. I do think, in fact, I posted on Twitter earlier today an article I wrote for Forbes in 2018, and I talk about this in my book as well, that I do think the future of Amazon is much more physical. And there are many big categories. Groceries has been the one we've been talking about most recently, but apparel and accessories, particularly on the higher end, that they're underpenetrated in, even though they have a huge business. So the idea that they might do something that is department store-like, I think is inevitable. What that will look like, including, I think there's still the possibility they'll acquire somebody, TBD. The only other thing I would say about it is we're going to have to sit down and have like a naming convention, because what they're talking about doing is not a department store, I don't think. I don't want to be too much of a literalist about it, but I don't expect it to look very much like what we would conventionally think about anyway, a department store, i.e. having departments. So I think it's going to be an apparel, accessories, and kind of omni-service center. But we'll see. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, never underestimate Amazon's ability to both put this distortion field of media around themselves to kind of keep everybody on their toes, and they have tremendous resources and talent. So never underestimate what could come next from them. I don't know. I mean, my thing is, if you're Amazon, growth for them, I don't know how much more growth there is for them in retail. I think healthcare and other areas more growth oriented initiatives. But like I said, never count them out.
Well, it's good to be king, right? Because you get to experiment in all sorts of areas, right? You've got that kind of money and that kind of culture. So, and then they get to pick the things that look like they've got real merit.
Have you ever been to London, England?
I have, many times.
Have you been on the tube, their subway, and the very famous? What do they say just about when you're in the tube? Mind the gap.
Yes.
Mind. And so that's my segue into earnings. So the Gap just today, we're recording this on Friday, just released some earnings that were really good, and some other companies have released earnings. What's your observation about the current or the latest roster of earnings releases?
Well, as we've talked about multiple times, it's a little hard, I think, to make sense of a lot of these earnings because we've been in such unusual times, and the comparisons are really easy for the apparel players anyway. So if we look at the Gap, anybody, Macy's, Kohl's, some of the others that are generally in the more casual part of apparel and accessories, they're comparing against really, really easy comparisons. So most of those numbers look really good. I'm not particularly surprised it's translating to the bottom line pretty well. I know a number of the analysts, and it's another thing we've talked about a bunch of times, how wrong analysts have been. They've been surprised by some of these earnings reports. But I think at the core of it is most of these retailers really locked down on expenses. They bought inventory pretty tightly. So we're not seeing nearly the kind of markdowns that we would typically see. So I think they're just getting a lot of operating leverage as the sales go up. So kind of as expected. Nordstrom was a bit of a disappointment, but then again, Nordstrom's more higher end apparel going out, more of that kind of stuff. And with COVID, that's not back to the degrees it was. So
Back to work and back to
yeah,
office, right?
right,
And the back to office, right? So I mean, you could see actually through the numbers, the back to school period kind of kicking in and going more normally.
right.
But what is missing, it feels like, is that back to the office kind of back to September, and that's going to hit Nordstrom and that category retailer, right?
Yeah, and I think as long as we've got, at least in the States and some other markets, we've still got this kind of COVID overhang where we're not beyond it the way I think well, many of us expected, and certainly probably all of us hoped. It's going to be tough, I think, for that to really get going. I think it more kind of creeps back as opposed to this big acceleration we've seen with more casual back to
Yeah.
school kind of apparel.
Let's talk about Warby Parker.
Yeah.
We've talked about them before. We were kind of rubbing our hands, kind of saying, "Hey, it looks like we're going to get our hands on some numbers." I think you've got your hands on some numbers. What was your observation from checking out their pre-IPO documentation?
Yeah, well, they've been rumored to be filing for going public, and sure enough, they filed in the S1. For those of us who like inside baseball, that's the filing document that you place with the SEC. And so I enjoyed. I don't know if enjoyed is the right word, but I did dig into it, and there's a lot of interesting facts there. The one that I have to say, I got to call up a few people because several people sometimes when I've been critical of some of these digitally native vertical brands growing very, very quickly, but losing a ton of money, several people who I thought actually knew what they were talking about said, well, Warby Parker, they're the exception. They've been making money. Well, it turns out that's not true. They have lost money and continue to lose money. Doesn't necessarily mean they're not positioned for a successful future because some of their uh, underlying customer economics, retention, those sort of things that point to long-term customer lifetime value actually look pretty positive. So some encouraging signs there, great growth, bit smaller business than I expected as well. So that's interesting. The most interesting thing, perhaps, is that their business is now about 50% brick and mortar and 50% online. A
Mm,
little bit of movement because of COVID, and it's a little bit hard to tell how that is going to look going
yeah.
forward. But they're already up to, I think, about 140 stores, planning to open a bunch more. So again, one of these brands that thought perhaps they could be a successful business online only that is now making a big play in physical, and it looks like they're there's a little bit of issue of how they account for it, but it looks like their physical retail is actually quite
Yeah.
profitable at the four wall level, which is encouraging for sure.
What do you think from a strategic perspective about the moat around Warby Parker? I wonder sometimes how big a moat they actually have because there's, from Bailey Nelson, I mean, there's half a dozen eyeglass brands with pretty much the same model. And when I walk into the different, like type organizations, and I'm a Warby Parker customer,
Yeah.
like they kind of look a bit the same. They kind of work the same. Like I'm not. What do you think about their moat, their ability to be really different? Initially, absolutely, but what do you think of it today?
I would frame the question a little bit different. I do think I'm pretty impressed with their moat because I think they have not only executed really, really well, they've built a very strong brand, and ultimately there's plenty of examples of products that are very, very similar, but it's the branding, it's the story that really allows them to charge those margins. So I would
Hmm.
say I'm pretty positive towards Warby Parker's differentiation and ability to grow. My bigger question is really how high it is up. Like I said, the business is a little bit smaller than I thought it was, mainly because I thought the online business was bigger. I mean, I think we had pretty good information on what the physical volume could be like. And they have a very particular model. They're at a certain price point, they're at a certain quality
Yeah,
level, they have added
yeah,
opticians and so forth, but they're not competing in the same way, or as holistically, I guess you could say, as some of the traditional players. And there's lots and lots of competition, not only some of the brands you mentioned, but the Sam's Club. And, so
Sure.
how, can this brand be 3 or 4 times as big without fundamentally changing the model that's gotten them there? That's more my question, not as much the branding and differentiation. I think they've done a really good job on that. And I'm a customer, and I guess the other thing I'd say about the size of the business, which there is some indication in the S1 that this is working, is people are, because of the lower price point, because of a little bit more of a fashion orientation, people are buying more frequently than the traditional eyeglass purchase of, I buy a nice pair and then, unless my prescription changes or I break them or I lose them or something, maybe
Right. Right.
multiple years before I buy another pair, or maybe I have a cheap backup pair. So they seem to be changing the purchase frequency a bit. But again, how many people are going to buy into that model compared to the more
Yeah.
traditional model?
Well, my bold prediction today on tape is the way they're going to grow is they're going to consolidate the market and start buying competitors.
Ooh,
So there are many, like very similar models at the same price point. I
mhm.
think somebody's got to come in there and start consolidating that business sooner than later, and I think it could be them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now they're going to have that equity out there to make those acquisitions. So could be.
That's right. All right, well, let's move on to the toy category. Our very special guest today is Ben Kaufman from Camp. There's so much activity over the past couple of weeks in the toy sector. Like, it's almost as if we planned it to have a gentleman like Ben. Incredible. So
We
we've
use
got
very powerful
toy
machine learning to determine our guests, and the algorithm predicted this
real
was
intelligence.
this is the perfect week to have Ben on.
Real intelligence. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So we've got, what do we got? We got Toys R Us going into Macy's. We've got uh, Disney opening up shop and shops really in Target. In Canada, here, Toys R Us got sold. So they moved from private equity into operating ownership, which is great to see. And the Toys R Us business, by the way, in Canada was a fantastic business.
Yeah,
They were shipping cash by the wheelbarrow to the U.S. business, and it was a really nice business. The 83 stores in Canada.
and the
So
U.S. business was
observations on what's
lighting that cash on fire apparently when they got it.
I just,
That didn't turn out so well.
woohoo! It's a little chilly here, so let's fire up some of that cash that the Canadians are sending down. Observations about what's going on in the toy category. I mean, they got supply chain. I mean, it's such an interesting business, right? A lot of business done in a small amount of time. It was a struggling category, but as Ben talks about, it really is an interesting, super interesting category.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a I guess a story we've seen played out in a lot of categories where you've got strong players like Toys R Us. We also had KB Toys here in the U.S., which were these mega brands. Really, I mean, they had lots of stores. Uh, I
Yep.
think pretty significant market share. And then I think one thing that happened was Walmart, Target, others made toys more of a loss leader, or at least a traffic driver. And so I think they
Yeah.
started to steal share from some of the traditional players. But Toys R Us really did not evolve to modern retail. They tried to be a little bit of everything, nothing inspirational really about their merchandising. They were pretty slow really to do digital. Then they were leveraged buyouts. So a lot of things went wrong at Toys R Us. A lot of things went wrong at KB Toys. FAO Schwarz, much smaller player, but they got themselves in trouble. So I think
Mm.
this created this big opportunity, kind of a vacuum in the market, because I don't think people are necessarily buying significantly fewer toys because Toys R Us isn't around. It's just that it's migrated online to Amazon, and it's migrated to places like Walmart and Target. So I think it's an attempt to bring perhaps a little bit more, certainly more distribution to put toys in a department store like Macy's. And then I think Target just continues to try to find those noteworthy brands where they can create more of a shop within a shop offering. That's been kind of their playbook. Ultimately, I mean, I got quoted in a news story this week about whether I thought Macy's would, like this would make a big dent, and my answer is no. I don't think it's going to make a big dent. It's
Mm.
400
Mm.
stores, which is not massive. It's a temporary offering. Macy's still, I think, has plenty of issues in terms of traffic. I don't know that toys are top of mind as for a
Yeah.
Macy's shopper necessarily, but certainly just by virtue of their traffic, it being the holidays, they're going to do some business.
Yeah.
But I doubt
They're
this
gonna
is.
they're gonna do some business.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I doubt. I think Disney at Target's way more interesting. And even though camp, as we'll talk about, is way smaller, I think that's a much more remarkable story than putting some toys
Right.
on the Macy's website and having a little offering for a couple months during the holidays.
Yeah, it's well put. And in Canada, we have Mastermind Toys, which is a great retailer, fantastic retailer, and they have a partnership with Hudson's Bay, right? So they do the merchandising shop and shop. So you can see it's kind of a seasonal thing, but let's
Mm-hmm.
have some expertise to curate the assortment. I mean, it's a strategy. Will it move the needle for the Hudson's Bay of the world or the Macy's? Probably not, but it's opportunistic, I think, right?
Yeah,
It's such a 6 weeks. Merchandise for 6 weeks, you make a bit of dough, and
right. Yeah.
why not, right?
No, I think it's worth doing. It's just to try to give it a great degree of strategic importance, or somehow Toys R Us is back in the U.S. anyway.
Right, right, right.
I wouldn't go there yet.
All right. Well, let's before we get to Ben Kaufman, just a reminder to the listeners of that we have a YouTube channel and our episodes are on our YouTube channel. The last episode, a little slow getting up. It should be up right now as you're listening to this, and then this episode will be up in a day or two, and you get to see we'll get to see the full on. The bonus is we do edit some of the stuff for time that you and I talk about. So the full episode, you get a bit of bonus content, I guess you could say, on the YouTube
But
channel.
wait, there's more.
Plus you get to see. Yeah, plus you get to see your smiling face. So that's a big bonus in and of itself. There you go. All right. Without further ado, let's get to Ben.